The moment their eyes finally met, everything changed. Not because of what she thought he'd been staring at, but because of what he actually saw, the birthmark that mirrored his late wife's exactly. The same crescent moon shape, the same location just below her collarbone. David's world stopped spinning as 30 years of memories crashed into the present. Could the universe really be this cruel, or this kind? If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that remind us how life's most meaningful connections often begin with misunderstandings. David Matthews hadn't meant to stare. Really, he hadn't. The early morning sun glinted off the Pacific as he jogged along the shoreline, the same route he'd taken every Saturday for the past 3 years since moving to this quiet coastal town with his daughter Emma. At 42, he maintained the routine religiously, not just for his physical health, but for his mental well-being. These solitary runs were when he processed life as a widower and single father to a now teenage daughter who reminded him more of her mother with each passing day. He was lost in thought about Emma's upcoming college applications when he nearly collided with a woman setting up a beach chair and umbrella. David swerved at the last second, stumbling slightly on the soft sand. "Sorry," he mumbled, catching his balance. Wasn't watching where. That's when he noticed it. Not what she assumed he was looking at, but the distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark just visible at the edge of her sundress. Identical to the one his wife Claire had had in exactly the same spot. The one he'd traced with his fingertips countless times during their 15 years together before cancer took her. His gaze had frozen there, his mind spinning with impossible coincidences. "Eyes are up here," the woman said sharply, crossing her arms over her chest. David's eyes snapped up to meet hers, his face flushing with embarrassment and something else. A strange, disorienting sense of déjà vu. "I'm so sorry," he stammered. "I wasn't, it's just," he stopped, realizing any explanation would sound like a terrible excuse. "I apologize. That was incredibly rude of me." The woman's expression remained cool, but something in her eyes softened slightly at his genuine contrition. "It's fine," she said, though her tone suggested it wasn't entirely. "Just be more mindful." David nodded, desperate to explain but knowing how it would sound. "I was staring at your birthmark because it's identical to my dead wife's wasn't exactly a great conversation starter." He mumbled another apology and continued his run, his rhythm thrown off, his mind racing faster than his feet. Melissa Winters watched the jogger continue down the beach, irritation still simmering beneath her skin. She'd moved to this small coastal town 6 months ago precisely to escape men like him, the ones who looked at her as if she were nothing more than the sum of her physical parts. After her messy divorce from a husband who'd made her feel increasingly invisible as a person while simultaneously objectifying her body, she'd promised herself a fresh start. She sighed, unfolding her chair with more force than necessary. The morning had started so promisingly too. The beach was nearly empty, the weather perfect, warm with a gentle breeze that carried the salt-tinged air across her face. This was supposed to be her sanctuary. As she settled into her chair and opened her book, she found herself unable to focus on the words. Something about the man's expression bothered her. It hadn't been lecherous exactly. More, shocked. Haunted, even. And his apology had seemed sincere. Melissa shook her head, trying to dismiss the encounter. She had a policy now, no more giving men the benefit of the doubt. Her ex-husband had taught her that lesson thoroughly over their 11-year marriage. She turned her attention back to her novel, determined to enjoy her Saturday morning despite the awkward start. "Dad, you're being weird," Emma declared over dinner that evening. At 16, she had developed an uncanny ability to read her father's moods. "You've barely touched your food, and you've been staring at the wall for like 5 minutes straight." David blinked, returning to the present. "Sorry, Em. Just distracted." "Work stuff?" she asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork. "No, not work." He hesitated. Should he tell her? Emma had been only 13 when Claire died, old enough to remember her mother vividly, young enough that the loss had shaped her formative teenage years. "I saw something today that reminded me of Mom." Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. "What was it?" "A birthmark," he said simply. "On a woman at the beach. Exactly like Mom's." "The crescent moon one?" Emma asked, her voice softening. She'd always been fascinated by her mother's distinctive birthmark, declaring it magical when she was little. David nodded. "Same shape, same spot." "It was unsettling." "Did you talk to her about it?" David winced, remembering the woman's cold response. "Not exactly. I was staring without realizing it, and she thought I was, well, looking at something else." Emma's eyes widened before she burst into laughter. "Dad! You got caught checking out a woman at the beach?" "I wasn't checking her out," he protested, though he couldn't help smiling at his daughter's amusement. It was good to see her laugh. "I was just surprised by the birthmark." "Sure, Dad," Emma teased, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." David threw his napkin at her playfully. "You're impossible." "I'm your daughter," she countered with a grin that was pure Claire. "It's my job." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, David found himself on the back deck, staring at the stars with a glass of whiskey in hand. He hadn't had this visceral a reminder of Claire in years. The initial shock of seeing the birthmark had faded, but left in its wake was a familiar ache, not the sharp, devastating pain of fresh grief, but the dull, persistent throb of absence that never truly went away. He wondered if he'd see the woman again. Part of him hoped not, the encounter had been embarrassing enough. But another part, a part he wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging, was curious about her. Not romantically, he told himself firmly. Just curious. Melissa spotted him immediately the following Saturday. Same time, same jogging route. This time, she was prepared, wearing a high-necked cover-up over her swimsuit. Not that she should have to change her clothing choices because of some strange man, but she wasn't in the mood for another awkward encounter. To her surprise, he altered his path to give her a wide berth, raising his hand in a small, apologetic wave as he passed. The gesture was so clearly meant to acknowledge his previous behavior while respecting her space that Melissa found herself nodding in return before she could think better of it. She watched him continue down the beach, noting his steady pace and the way he occasionally stopped to pick up pieces of trash, tucking them into a small bag he carried. Not what she'd expected from someone she'd mentally categorized as just another entitled man. The following Saturday, he jogged past again, this time accompanied by a teenage girl who bore a striking resemblance to him, same dark hair, same angular features softened by a warm smile. They were deep in conversation, the girl gesturing animatedly while he listened with obvious affection. A father and daughter, Melissa realized. Something about seeing him in this new context shifted her perception slightly. She found herself wondering about their story. It was on the fourth Saturday that the pattern broke. Melissa had just settled into her usual spot when a sudden downpour sent beachgoers scurrying for cover. She hurriedly gathered her things, but the rain intensified before she could pack up completely. Struggling with her umbrella and beach chair, she didn't notice the jogger approaching until he was right beside her. "Need a hand?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Melissa hesitated, rain plastering her hair to her face. "I've got it," she said automatically, even as her beach chair collapsed in exactly the wrong direction. He didn't push, just nodded and turned to go. Something about his easy acceptance of her refusal made her reconsider. "Actually," she called after him, "if you wouldn't mind carrying the chair, that would be helpful." He turned back, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Happy to help." As they hurried toward the beach parking lot, he introduced himself. "I'm David, by the way. And I want to apologize again for that first day." "I wasn't," he broke off, seeming to struggle with what to say. staring at my chest. Melissa supplied dryly. No. I mean, yes, but not for the reason you think. He looked so genuinely distressed that Melissa found her curiosity piqued despite herself. What was the reason, then? She asked as they reached her car. David hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Your birthmark, he said simply. My late wife had one exactly like it, in the same spot. It caught me off guard. Of all the explanations Melissa had imagined, this wasn't one of them. She blinked, momentarily speechless. I know how that sounds, he continued quickly. But it's the truth. Claire, my wife, had a crescent-shaped birthmark right there. He gestured vaguely toward Melissa's collarbone. Seeing it again after 3 years was jarring. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Melissa found herself softening despite her usual guardedness. I'm sorry about your wife, she said quietly. Thank you. He helped her load the chair into her trunk. I'm David Matthews, by the way. The proper introduction I should have led with weeks ago. Melissa Winters, she replied, surprising herself by extending her hand. As they shook hands in the rain, something shifted between them, not romance, not yet, but the tentative beginning of understanding. The next time they met was by chance at the local grocery store. Emma spotted Melissa first, nudging her father with an elbow and a knowing grin. Isn't that the beach lady? She whispered none too quietly. David looked up from comparing cereal nutritional labels to see Melissa examining avocados a few yards away. Before he could respond, Emma was already moving toward her. Hi. I'm Emma, his daughter announced, extending her hand with the direct confidence of youth. You're the lady with the same birthmark as my mom, right? David hurried over, mortified. Emma. You can't just. But Melissa was smiling, clearly amused by Emma's forthright approach. That's apparently me, she confirmed, shaking Emma's hand. Though I usually go by Melissa. Dad told me about the mix-up, Emma continued, ignoring her father's embarrassment. He felt really bad about it. Did he now? Melissa's eyes met David's, a hint of teasing in them. Absolutely mortified, David admitted. I considered changing my jogging route permanently. I'm glad you didn't, Melissa said, then looked surprised at her own words. Emma glanced between them with undisguised interest. We're making pasta tonight, she announced. Dad's specialty. You should come over and try it. Emma. David exclaimed, though part of him was impressed by his daughter's boldness. Melissa laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. Your daughter is quite the wingman. She's grounded for life, David said dryly, though he couldn't help smiling. I'm serious, Emma insisted. Dad makes amazing pasta, and we always have too much. Plus, I want to see the birthmark that made him act like such a weirdo. Emma Matthews, David groaned. To his surprise, Melissa seemed to be considering the invitation. What kind of pasta? She asked. Pappardelle with wild mushroom ragu, Emma answered promptly. It's basically the only impressive thing he knows how to cook. Hey! David protested. Am I wrong? Emma challenged. No, he admitted. Melissa looked at them both, seeming to make a decision. I haven't had a home-cooked meal with company in a while, she said. If you're serious about the invitation, I'd like that. David felt something warm unfurl in his chest, not romance, not yet, but possibility. We're serious, he said. Though I should warn you that Emma will absolutely interrogate you about your entire life story. Dad! Emma protested. Am I wrong? David echoed his daughter's earlier question. No, she admitted, mimicking his tone perfectly. Melissa laughed again, and David found himself thinking it was a sound he wouldn't mind hearing more often. Dinner that night was surprisingly easy. Emma, true to her father's warning, asked dozens of questions, but her genuine interest made the interrogation feel more like friendly conversation than an inquisition. Melissa found herself sharing more than she'd intended, about her move to the small coastal town after her divorce, her work as a marine biologist at the local research center, even some of the painful details of her marriage's dissolution. "He made me feel invisible," she explained, surprised by her own candor. "Not all at once, but gradually, over years. By the end, I didn't recognize myself anymore." David nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Grief can do that too," he said quietly. "Make you forget who you are outside of the pain." Emma, sensing the conversation had turned serious, stood to clear the plates. "I'll handle dessert," she announced. "You two keep talking about depressing adult stuff." Once she disappeared into the kitchen, Melissa smiled. "She's remarkable," she told David. "You've done an amazing job with her." "I wish I could take credit," he said, "but she's always been this way, direct, compassionate, occasionally terrifyingly perceptive. Gets it from her mother." "Tell me about her," Melissa said gently. "Your wife." David was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "Claire was vibrant," he finally said. "The kind of person who filled a room just by being in it. We met in college. She was studying marine biology, actually." "Really?" Melissa's eyebrows rose in surprise. David nodded. "She switched to education eventually, became an elementary school science teacher. Said she wanted to create future marine biologists instead of being one." His smile was soft with memory. "She loved the ocean. Said it was the only thing big enough to match her curiosity." "She sounds wonderful," Melissa said sincerely. "She was." David met Melissa's eyes. "The birthmark, she used to joke it was her connection to the moon and tides. That's why seeing yours was such a shock. It was like seeing a ghost." Melissa's hand unconsciously rose to her collarbone, where the crescent-shaped mark lay hidden beneath her blouse. "I've always been self-conscious about it," she admitted. "My ex used to say it looked like a scar." David's expression darkened slightly. "It's beautiful," he said simply. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. "Dessert is served," Emma announced, returning with 3 bowls of ice cream. "I added extra chocolate sauce because we have company." The spell broken, David and Melissa exchanged small smiles before turning their attention to Emma and her ice cream creations. Later, as David walked Melissa to her car, a comfortable silence settled between them. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they reached her vehicle. "It's been a long time since I've felt so comfortable with people." "Thank you for taking a chance on us," David replied. "Especially after our awkward introduction." Melissa laughed softly. "Maybe the universe has a strange sense of humor." "Or timing," David suggested. As she drove away, Melissa found herself wondering if perhaps the universe knew exactly what it was doing after all. Over the following weeks, their lives began to intertwine in small, meaningful ways. Saturday mornings evolved from distant nods of recognition to shared walks along the shoreline. David would complete his run, then circle back to join Melissa with 2 cups of coffee from the beachside cafe. They discovered a shared love of early mornings, of the ocean's changing moods, of quiet conversations that meandered like the shoreline itself. Emma often joined them, sometimes walking alongside, sometimes running ahead to collect interesting shells or stones, always bringing an energy that balanced their more measured interactions. One Saturday morning, about 2 months after their dinner, David arrived at the beach to find Melissa already in conversation with a tall, angry-looking man. Even from a distance, David could see the tension in her posture, the way she had crossed her arms protectively over her chest. He hesitated, not wanting to intrude but concerned by her obvious discomfort. When the man grabbed Melissa's arm, David's hesitation vanished. He jogged over quickly, Emma following close behind. "Everything okay here?" he asked, keeping his tone casual but positioning himself slightly between.